Well, hello everybody. Welcome to this episode of the About Time podcast with me, Chris Nichols. This is the series where I'm having conversations with people whose work has inspired and influenced me over the years. And I'm delighted today that Helena Clayton is with us. I mean, Helena, welcome, first of all. It's brilliant to have you here.
It's really good to be here. I was tickled pink to be invited, and I'm looking forward to this conversation, not least because I have no idea where we're going to be going, which is very lovely.
And, you know, some of the people on the podcast, are people I've worked with really closely for a long time, and some are people our lives have just touched along the way. And you and I feel like I've known you for a very long time, and yet we've not worked together at all. It's just that our paths have crossed and our interests have often coincided. So I think the first time we came across each other may have been when you first started working on the theme of love in organisations, and that sparked me to remember my own master's degree. But maybe a great place is to start by telling people who you are and what you do.
Yes. Well, let me take an organisational run at it. Other stuff might bob up in the conversation. So I've been in the field of leadership and organisational development, coaching, facilitation for 25 years, probably. I started off in HR in big organisations in London. I went to Roffey Park as a consultant, where I really did learn my trade, and I have a deep bow of gratitude really to Roffey as it was then and the people there. And then I've been freelance for about 15 or so years, I think, maybe a bit more. I'm not so good at the maths of all of this. So my work is mostly designing and running leadership development programs in, big global luxury brands through to small not-for-profits in the UK. Facilitation, I work as a coach and a coach supervisor now, which is work I just have relatively recently come to and just love. And alongside that, and integrated with it, I'll mention the word love, which is how you introduced me. In about 2017, I think I started to get really curious and interested about where love was in organisations. I was doing a lot of personal growth work. I may say more about that later. And in those workshops, what I saw was when people brought difficulty, stress, struggle, trauma, when that was met with love, which it was time and time again in various ways and forms, there was healing. Not that it was healed, but there was healing. And I'd be part of these extraordinary workshops and see what happened there. And then I would know that many of the folks on those workshops on a Monday morning put on some version of a suit and went to a corporate environment where there was none of that. And I started to get interested in how people could be here and being vulnerable and open and supportive and loving and everything that is there, and somehow lose that or not connect with it or leave it behind or not allow it in the workplace. So that then got me interested in love. So I also, as part of and alongside my fairly straightforward corporate work in many ways, it isn't straightforward, but it's relatively conventional. Also run workshops exploring love in leadership and in organisations. I run free workshops exploring what forms of love do we need in tough times. And I run a love lab, which is an in-person experiment, really, in how do we connect with people that we don't know. So so that's a slice of corporate stuff that increasingly now includes love. Yeah.
That's just a brilliant intro, and God, I could go in all kinds of directions just making connections to the people who've been on the series so far, because I remember the second or third one was with Jeff Mead's storyteller. You know Jeff, yeah. And he was talking about the difference between the life world and the machine world, the work of Habermas, and how that turns up in his work. And, I think this difference between where you can speak with love and where you can't speak about love, is part of that.
Yeah.
And then Michael Chaskalson was, we were looking at compassion and awakening in leadership and organisational life, and that's obviously entwined with this in some way. But I mean, for people who have never thought about love in organisational life, I mean, what are you talking about? Yeah, what do you mean?
Yeah, so in 2018, I did a piece of research because I knew I wanted to look at love. It felt like it came to me. Elizabeth Gilbert talks about when an idea comes to you and it feels an inspiration. She says, don't ignore it, don't push it away, because that idea will go find somebody else and they'll work with it. So let it in. So I knew I needed to do something with love. I didn't know what. I knew it felt a bit bold for me. So I did a piece of research, and those kind of core questions that I asked then have sort of fed the work ever since. So I asked things like, does love have a place in organisations and in leadership? Overwhelmingly, the answer was yes. And though, with the caveat that the people responding to that survey were self-selecting. I think if I took a random selection in a typical organisation, I think that would be a lower percentage, but it was high. 94% said yes, for sure it does. Then I said, how comfortable or easy is it for you to talk about love in the workplace? And overwhelmingly the answer was not at all. This is really tricky, problematic. Then I asked what makes it tricky and problematic. And then I asked, what do we even mean by love in organisations? So those were the kind of 4 threads, and they've been the threads ever since. So the survey results showed that there were a handful of things that people felt was love. There was one obvious one, the classic, if you like. There was a bucket that had in it empathy, compassion, softness, kindness, allowing, the things that you would automatically associate with love. So care, in effect. But that was only one. The second one, really hard on the heels, was listening, but giving somebody your full attention, being fully present. It was super clear that people said, when somebody is fully present for me, that feels like love. Third was holding strong boundaries. So there's something about, it's not an oppositional piece, but it's the kind of riverbanks within which care can flow. But a strong theme about love is also giving somebody some difficult feedback, or saying no, or holding high standards. Something about boundaries and saying no. Yet another was generosity and putting others' needs before your own. That's tricky because for many people, some people already overdo that. So none of these are...
That relates closely to the previous one, doesn't it?
It does, yes, exactly. So there's something about saying no also is a form of self-love, self-protection, holding strong boundaries for yourself as well as for others. And then the fifth one was something around, you might call it acceptance, radical acceptance, recognizing that everybody is messed up, flawed, doing their best, dealing with trauma, so that the behavior you see is only part of the picture. So something about accepting all of who we are. So those were some of the things that came up from that survey, and I've worked with those ever since. And they do make a really nice syllabus, if you like, for a manager or a leader who might say, okay, if I dial up these things, that's a good thing. But I've since gone on to explore extensions of those. So picking up on the boundary, lovers, boundary holding, for me, I'm interested in exploring things like, how is anger a form of love? So how is compassion a form of love? How is forgiveness a form of love? How is rest, or activism, how are they forms of love? So I'm really interested in taking love off the shelf of only being about care, and also taking it away from the religious or Greek, the religious or Greek associations about a general sense of loving everybody, brotherly love. Of course, that's there. But I'm more interested in thinking, what does it mean in practice? I think Jeff Mead, and this came from his book, and I forget who else talked to me about this. I'm less interested in love as what is loving. So what is loving behaviour? How can I be 2% more loving in this exchange or in that situation? That I'm interested in, what it looks like in practice.
Yeah, brilliant. Gosh, there's so many places we could go from that. I mean, just as you were speaking, it reminded me, a very long time ago when I was doing my master's degree, I also had a gig in the military. And I used to do a leadership talk on day one, or it may have been day two, of the Royal Defence College master's degree for leaders. And they had me in to do the relationship between love and complexity. So leading in complexity, and I called it love in military leadership in times of complexity. And I presented a model that I thought I'd made up. We'll come back to that. And essentially it was, love of what you're doing, kind of love of the task, love of the context, love of the mission, love of the people, treating your team, your colleagues, your collaborators with love, and loving yourself enough to do this well. And the commandant, I remember, was this is so good, this is right. He said, except that last one. He said, can't do that last one, that's not right. And it was fascinating how the self can get delegitimized. Yeah. And that was one thing. And then the other thing that came to me was at that time, and probably a lot of the time, I still work with F. Scott Peck's definition of love, which is, he defines as something like kind of a disciplined spiritual nurturing of another. So taking somebody serious as a human being, taking their growth seriously as a human being. And for me, that was what I was working with then.
Yeah, and thinking of the connection with the military makes me think of love and men, because of the workshops I run, free to enrol, and when I run paid workshops, and even in organisations when I run them, the people who sign up are almost always women. So the number of men who sign up are very, very few. And I'm interested in that. I mean, I understand some of the reasons why that might be. And for me, a conversation about love in organisations and much wider and in leadership is a conversation for men and women to have together. So, I love that. I'm imagining the audience for your Defence College work was mostly men, but it's lovely
mostly,
to
particularly this was 20 years ago. So mostly, and not entirely, but mostly. But I think I've always found working with military groups really human, because it just, you cannot performance pay people into gunfire.
Right.
It's not transactional, except in some very specific circumstances. But love and really caring for your team actually is big in the military circles.
Huge. And my husband Dom was a Royal Marine for 12 years, and when we met hill walking, and he and I were walking together. We hadn't got together at that time, so he didn't know me at all. And we were walking in the Lake District, and we stopped for a cup of tea. He took out his flask, he unscrewed, he poured, and he offered it to me. Now, I still, I'm so moved by that. He first gave it to me. And and I had my own flask, and I said, what are you doing? Why? You know what? And he said, well, we learned that first you look after the people around you, and they will look after you, and between us we look after each other. But he always, you know, you put your men first. And I'd never forgotten that. It's such a tiny thing, but wow, it had an impact. And I've absolutely, through learning more about military life through Dom, I was pretty judgy and projected a whole load of stuff onto men in the military, and I have radically changed my perspective on that.
So, I mean, maybe say a bit about the workshops you run, and what are they like, and what are you trying to do with them?
Oh, I don't know what I'm trying to do with them. I keep doing them anyway. I think that's the...
Well, that's
I think
beautiful in
that's
itself.
something,
Actually. That's
yeah.
love in itself,
Yeah.
I think. There's something about the curiosity and the open inquiry that is a gesture of love.
Yeah, thank you. I'll take that, because it certainly isn't instrumental. You know, if I do these, then I will get, or somebody. It isn't that way at all. And I run a monthly workshop, which is a free workshop. I'll never charge for it. 2 hours, called Acts of Love for Tough Times. And I'm, like many, increasingly bothered. Bothered is such a ridiculous word. By the way the world is going. I'm with people like Margaret Wheatley and Jem Bendell, who talk about climate collapse, societal collapse, and Margaret Wheatley says, you know, we don't have 10 good years even, and other views are available. So, but I'm inclined that way, and what bothers me is how people are likely to treat each other as that very dramatic change happens. And I have a feeling that if you and I met in a supermarket where there was one loaf of bread left, I don't know that I wouldn't try and take it from you. And if I magnify that, that's a very dramatic example, but I really want us to treat each other well. And so my work with love is at least in part for that. How do we help people stay connected to the humanity in each of us, the deep humanity that sometimes gets buried by life, and also the human connection between us? How can you and I, and you and me, and many, many others, how can we hold hands through tricky times? Something like that, I think, is the purpose. So I run the free workshops each month, and once a year I run the Love Lab, which is in November, which is really a very playful experiment, which I've run about 4 or 5 times now, where it's an open enrolment group, so people won't know each other. Some might, of course. And we do a series of safe, gentle, playful, provocative, sometimes quite bold experiences that just help people see the human being behind the cutout. And it feels good work to be doing.
Good, timely, vital. I mean, I'm kind of, part of me is completely with you on the collapse side, because like you, I'm familiar with Jem's work. I've read Hospicing Modernity and come to your workshop on it, your inquiry.
Yes.
And I'm very taken by, I forget his name, I think it's Dougal Hines' work. At Work in the Ruins.
At Work in the Ruins. Very good.
I have to see if we can get Dougal on here at some point. And there is that, and it matches beautifully the master's degree I used to run at Ashridge on sustainability, where it wasn't a glossy, optimistic, it was a gritty, working with love. What are we going to do, even if the path we're on may be pretty dark? And Chris Seeley, who at that point was dying, or at least by the time we finished that work, had a brain tumour and became very ill. and died before that intake of the course finished, said some of this may be about going down well and preserving with love what can be preserved, and I thought there's something incredibly powerful in that, which matches John Michael Greer's and all the people we've just talked about. Yeah, it's not all dark, but you can't do good work without recognising the darkness.
And I think, the other thread that's been building for me for a while in terms of interest, wider than organisations, but is already finding its way into organisational work for me is learning more about how to hold good endings. What is a good end? And that obviously relates to, the end of a project, but increasingly, clients I'm working with now, many are going through restructures, many are in a holding pattern because they know this, a lot is going to be ending in the way they have worked. So there's something about what is a good ending. And I have a long-standing, well, certainly over the last couple of years, interest in death and dying. So I'm training partway through my training in end-of-life, becoming an end-of-life doula. So there's something about while we are dying, which may be soon, maybe way down the line, how do we live well? What does living well and dying well mean? And I did my first volunteer session at a hospice only yesterday. So there's something for me really, really important about helping people in organisations consider, focus on, attend to endings. So I think that's going to become more of a theme.
Beautiful.
In the work I do.
And that's another echo we have of each other, because as you know, my daughter Gemma Lloyd is a palliative care nurse and also an organisational coach. So we've been doing some work together on what can palliative care tell us about good enough endings in organisations. And I think it's important because the hospicing word has started to become mainstream, partly through the book Hospicing Modernity, but only partly through that. And I'm noticing in social media language some we just need to hospice this. Oh, we just need to hospice that. And that is a very loose, very loose use of the word, without really inquiring, well, what does that mean? What is hospicing, and what is good enough? What is hospicing with love? Yeah. And they say when you went into the hospice to do your first shift, you felt it.
Right, to really, and also to spend some time with people who have terminal diagnoses. There is, yes, they walk with death really close, but they also live life and are full of life. So it's holding both that feels really important. And I'm minded too of, I think I've shared this on LinkedIn, but there's a beautiful set of cards.
Tending to endings.
Will Brown, yes, Tending to Endings. Gorgeous. Nature-based. Again, I think we're seeing a lot more nature-based lenses coming into organisational work. But yes, his Tending to Endings cards.
I don't know the author. Who is it? Do you happen to know?
Will Brown. I want to say Brown, and I'm now thinking, I hope it is Brown.
I promise
sure
at the end of this, we will look it up and we'll put a link around this so that people can find it. I also know that one of my contacts in Devon, Tony Spencer, has another set of cards that she's working on. I think there's some lovely things happening.
Really. And there's a lovely book called Goodbye, just out by Lizzie Bentley Bowers and Alison Lucas. Also lovely, really practical way for folks in organisations to attend to endings well. Yeah, it's becoming
and I'm glad it is. And of course, not specifically about organisations, but anything by Catherine Mannix is, with the end in mind. And she was also written a brilliant book on listening as well. I can't remember the title, but
she has. It's called Listen, I think.
Lovely.
I think so.
And what we're talking about, I often find that these endings, I certainly remember some absolutely awful endings, awful endings in my own life that you can be treated really well in an organisation. When you're in an organisation, you can come to an end, and there's nothing around it. There's no preparation. There's no follow-up. It's just bad endings. One of the lessons I learnt is, after many such cycles, I'm a slow learner, was, don't fall in love with complex adaptive processes, because they can't love you back. But you could still, in those, act with love. And organisations, they have organisational work to do, but that doesn't mean they have to be inhuman or unliving or unloving.
Right. And I'm doing a Leading from Love in-house program with an organisation, and somebody asked last week about organisational love. So we talked about policies and procedures, and a way that if you're designing a policy or a procedure, can you just factor in the question, in what way is this process loving? And open up a discussion. And in what way might this process or procedure be a little more loving? And it might not change a thing, but the conversation about it could or would have some impact. So, I think there's a system, or a slightly more systemic version of that as well.
I think you're absolutely right, because there is something about some organisations do embody love, or at least compassion, or some aspect of taking humanity and the sacredness of humanity seriously. And often it rests on a faith basis. So if I'm thinking about, the old Quaker companies, many of them around the UK and elsewhere, which were based on sometimes a paternalistic and perhaps patriarchal view of love, but they were built to have an eye on the well-being and look after people, at least while they were in the organisation. And the friendly societies had some of that in them too.
Yeah.
Sorry, did I just stop you saying something?
No, I was just musing. Go ahead.
Yeah. I was also thinking, I keep interrupting myself. I was thinking about more than human, love and the more than human world. And some of the most profound examples I've seen of people bringing love into organisation, and sometimes then making it really rigorous and procedural, are people who, like Victoria Hirth, absolutely passionate about purpose-led human organisations that act intelligently towards the planet. And at the same time, a lot of her work is to codify that in ISOs and standards so that dumb stuff gets stopped. Dumb stuff doesn't happen, and people get guided as to how to do this better, even if it's not their thing.
Yeah, and that reminds me of a conversation I have from time to time around love and links to the more than human, is the extent to which, and it's a spectrum, right, or a polarity to hold, etc. The extent to which we should look at love through a behavioural lens. Okay, so do these things, and they are likely to be slightly more loving things than other things, which is slightly mechanistic, slightly, well, if I do these, or something that is probably a more spiritual connection with how am I, how is it not me and nature, but how do I experience myself as nature? How am I, how am I and the more than human world the same? How might we think of, the idea that there is only one of us here, and we are all fractals of, I'm going to say God, but for anyone listening, please swap out God for anything that makes more sense to you. So how are we all fractals of something much bigger? And that's sometimes a discussion I have with people, to what extent should we look at love as something behavioural, and to what extent do we somehow need to, could benefit from really seeing us ourselves much more systemically, I think, and including the natural world, including those people over there. So there's something about including the biggest version of things.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, we humans have a tendency to define ourselves by what we're not, and to other a lot of the world that's not us, whatever we mean by us, you know, whether that's nationalism or inside this corporate culture, or, well, you know, I'm human, not a whatever. And as Michael Truskowson would say, well, ultimately these are all made up boundaries, including the I'm a human, you know, and what on earth does that mean? You know, you know, totally. I'm at least half bacteria, you know, and 70% water. What? Yeah.
And I think, you know, and I know you share this lens and the importance of it, which is increasingly I'm trying to take as systemic a lens as possible, you know. So how with this coaching client, how can we come up and up and up and up and up? And when we do, what do we see? What gets included? And that work feels a really important thing to be bringing to organisations. How do we help people come up and out so that they can include the people over the partition there, the people in that department, clients, competitors, you know, their customers. So how can we, all of us, start to take a more inclusive, systemic lens, which I think is also a loving lens, because when we see and understand more of what's happening for them, whoever them is, for them, to them, then it increases our capacity for compassion, I think. And from there we can maybe head to love. But something about including and taking a more systemic lens feels really important for organisations these
love,
days.
whether you call it love or call it something else, being integral to the ability to hold that gaze of caring about something more than just an instrumental and parochial me-ness. Because in some ways we live our lives in organisations and in frameworks that are designed to contain and make things partial, and make things controllable and clear, because then you can have a company make products and issue quarterly reports to your analysts and things like that. But at the same time, what's going on inside it is people with actual lives who are part of a living system that is not contained by any of those made up things. And sometimes the relationship between that life world and that system world is not a nice one. It's not in service of flourishing.
It really is not,
And every gesture we can make that opens up the livingness in a loving way helps something good happen, I think.
Beautiful. That is so beautifully expressed. Thank you. That's a gift to me today. And also, you know, when I think of, so I want to kind of bring it back to the reason we're talking, really. So, happy birthday for some time ago. But yes, your 65th year, 66th year. I was also thinking about. I listened to your conversation with Philippa yesterday, and I was struck by what you said about 10 years in one career, 10 years in another shift. So I was curious, and I was curious what might you see for yourself, or for the world, or for organisational work in the next 10 years?
Well, you know, assuming I'm still here, and I'm planning to be here for at least some of it, with a bit of luck. Yeah,
very good.
I want to carry on doing a lot of what I do. I'm lucky for a long time now to have done work that I just love doing, with people I love doing it with. It doesn't mean I will always do as much of it. My artful knowing and artful exploring is important, and sometimes that gets crowded out, so I want to make sure there's room for that. But I'm right now, and I think this is at least for the next year or two, interested in the dance between the darkness and the optimism about the future. So I completely get the collapse work, and I think that's important. And on the other side of that, I'm really taken by Rob Hopkins' work and the good ancestor work. No, not Rob, I can't remember Roman, I forget the name. Yes, exactly that. I'm going to a workshop. I'm going to his workshop.
I don't know if I'm saying his name right. Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a lot around. There are good things happening that are signs of something possible. It's like that famous quote about another world is possible, and if you listen, you can hear her breathing. There is breath of better going on. So I think Game Shift has always been in service of flourishing, and I'd like to play my part in helping people to both hold the darkness and live into the possible. Yeah, what that looks like, I know, playing around like the last 10 years. I expect it to be something. Yeah. What about you? Of course.
Can I ask you one more question first? So I'm wondering then, thank you for that. I'm wondering what feeds that work for you? What resources you, what nourishes you, what educates you, what kind of feeds the underground water table for you to do that work?
I'm not a religious spiritual person, but I am a secular Buddhist. And I take the relief of suffering seriously. I think there's a lot of suffering. I also don't, so it resources me. I'm spectacularly bad at looking after myself. And in some ways I give myself away quite a lot, and I don't mind doing that, but I don't do it all the time. But what resources me beyond that, I think, is working with the right people, just groups of people holding a shared inquiry, a common question, who are genuinely curious to find out something about how to do something better, how to address something they don't know. It's beyond the expertise of any one person. I always say Game Shift, we work with experts to help them push the boundaries of their expertise, of course, and we work where nobody's an expert. And a lot of this, there is no expertise. We have to get beyond expertise and create new expertise in a place where nobody knows. And a lot of my work is in there, and will continue to be so, using all of the lenses, including artful knowing, including love, including Buddhism, including whatever else, deep ecology, because we need all of it to see any of it. It's like David White says, you need a language big enough to be alive, and if the language is too small, it can't be alive. There's not enough room. So to some extent, I'm in the business of widening the language.
I like that.
And what about you?
Yeah, I like that. Thank you. So I'm 61, coming up in a couple of weeks. And I think, I'm definitely caught up in the grind culture, right? I'm definitely, hooked by capitalism. And so I will keep working productively, earning a living, for sure, for as long as people are happy to pay me and as long as I've got energy. And I think if I have a spiritual practice, it's, I guess, a couple of things. It's to care less, about getting something right or looking a particular way or whatever. And to let go more, I think. The shift, which is something I've been working on all my life, I think, about making something happen versus letting something happen, is one I'm always caught up in. So if I can learn a little more to let things happen and respond to things as opposed to not fight them exactly, I think that will serve my work well. And not least because with the people I coach or work with in organisations, oh my word, you know, we use the term carrying capacity around the planet's capacity for population. But equally, I'm starting to use it in terms of our own individual capacity to hold the stuff that people are holding. So if I can bring a little more of looseness, I think, to support people who are tight in their working lives and their lives, I think that maybe something like that, I think. So for me, I think that's more time in nature, more time outdoors, more time in silence, in solitude, in stillness. I have a feeling that there's something about, it's always been this, but way more focus on being and tuning into what's there as opposed to doing. Something like that, I think. And I still feel, it's ridiculous, I still feel the need to say, but I will still be working hard, of course, because I really am, you know, aware of how caught up I am in this thing about, you know, still needing to, I don't know.
This might be a difficult question, and feel free not to answer it. So in that caught upness,
okay.
the working more, where does love thread into it?
That's a beautiful question. So I go to, the lesson I learned the hard way was about 13 years ago, 14 maybe. I had chronic fatigue for 2 years. So I spent 2 years mostly in bed. I mean, I worked a little bit part-time through those 2 years, but I learned that I could only rest my way out of it. I had to literally just give up a lot. And that I'm not with that now. And there is I have a better awareness of where my warning signs are. So I think for me it's around just being kinder, softer to my body, to my nervous system, letting myself off the hook. So it's a form of self-love, I think. And how can I, you know, the Mary Oliver poem, you do not have to be good. You do not have to walk 200 miles on your knees across the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Now, I won't have got that quite right, but that's the gist of the beginning of her poem, The Wild Geese, which I think is right. So there's something about what happens if I move at the pace my body wants me to move, as opposed to the pace my head would have me moving. So that feels a form of love, actually. Inviting my body to lead the way and my body's
Now that's beautiful.
pace.
Now, a little earlier on, you said something about the Marines and always put our men first and the flask. And I was going to say, but you've got to look after yourself enough to hand over the flask, to have the flask.
You do.
To have something in the flask
true.
to hand over. There is,
Yes, you do.
And there's a Buddhist sutta called the bamboo acrobat, which is it's the bamboo acrobat. Unless you look after yourself enough, the acrobat at the bottom, all the ones you're supporting fall down. Hello, we're almost at 45 minutes. Is there? We could talk for a week. Is there anything that I've actually stopped you saying that you've come here? I must say, I want to say this.
Stop me saying. I love that. No, of course not. No, and there's nothing that feels burning or pressing for me either, other than to say what a great privilege and enjoyable experience this has been, Chris, talking with you like this. What a treat.
My
absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for
may not be the last one. So, Helena, thank you so much. Just brilliant work you do. We'll make sure that we ask you for any links you want to share to you, your writing, your workshops, whatever. We'll put them on the site along with this. So thank you. And thank you to everybody who's been listening to this episode of About Time. There will be more. But in the meantime, just to close with one more word of thanks to Helena. That was just beautiful. Thank you very much, and have a good weekend when it comes.
Will do. Thank you, Chris.